topic is proforma of cost sheet. Here the proforma is like particulars and total cost and cost per unit columns are divided. So first the cost sheet will open with the opening stock of raw materials. So with that after that if there is any purchase of raw material in the year, we have to add that purchase of raw material to opening stock of raw material. Next, we have to add the purchase expenses when purchases are made. Those expenses related to the raw material. So those purchase expenses should be added to the opening stock of raw material. And carriage inwards, so it is also related to purchases, so and related to raw material, so these expenses are also added to the raw material. And octroi and custom duty, if any octroi and custom duty is paid on purchase of raw material, so those are also added to the raw material. And freight on purchase of material, if any freight is there for on the purchase of raw material, so those expenses should be added to the raw material. So after that make a total in inner column, and from that less purchase returns. So if a company returned any purchases, so we have to less those purchase returns. And abnormal loss of raw material, if there is any abnormal loss of raw material like theft, fire, so fire accident, so with that any loss of raw material, so those loss should be deducted from the raw material. And closing stock of raw material, so at the end of the year, is there any raw material, or at the end of the period, is there any raw material, closing raw materials, that should be deducted from raw material. And with that we'll get the cost of direct material consumed. So after adding those items and deducting some items, so we'll get the cost of direct raw material which is used in the production. So we'll get the direct raw material. And the next labor, so direct wages of labor are taken, and direct expenses are taken. Direct expenses are like wages, and so we have to add the direct expenses, then royalty, if any, paid by the company. By adding these three, we'll get the prime cost. Prime cost means which is directly involved in the production. And next, overheads. So here to the prime cost we have to add the overheads, work of factory overheads. So indirect material means spare parts and the oil, the fuel, those are the things, indirect material for the production of the products. And indirect wages which means supervisor salary, the next leave wages, so if the labor took any leave, so if it is a paid leave, so those wages should also be added to the overheads. If any bonus is given to the worker, so those bonus should be added to the added under overheads to the prime cost. Next, overtime wages, if the company conducting overtime, so those overtime wages also added to added under overheads to prime cost, and fuel and power, they are using it, so we have to add, and rent and taxes. So if any rent paid by the company, those rent and taxes, if tax paid by the company, those taxes should add under overheads to the prime cost. Under overheads, again we have to add insurance paid by the company for different things. Maybe it is a general insurance, most probably. So those that insurance should added under overheads. And factory lighting. So this factory lighting divided into units. So those units are calculated by the area of room. So according to that, the lighting should added to overheads. And supervisor salary. So supervisor salary is also added to overheads. And work stationery which is bought by the company for the works, so that stationery should also be added. And if canteen and welfare expenses, if the company providing canteen facility for their workers and laborers, so those expenses should also be added. And the welfare facilities, if any medical facilities or any other facilities that company is providing for the laborers and workers, so those expenses should also be added. And repair expenses of building, of machineries, of anything, so if is there any repair expenses, those are also added. And worker salaries and depreciation of plant and machinery, and depreciation, if there is any depreciation on plant and machinery, so those should added under overheads. Works expenses and gas and water expenses, and technical director fees. So if the company has technical director to assist in the operating of machines or the computers technology or any other technology, so those directors fees should be added under overheads. And laboratory expenses, if the company has laboratory, so if they are doing the experiments in that or other laboratory, so those expenses should also be added. And works transport expenses, so if the company providing the workers transportation facilities, those transportation facility expenses should also be added. And the telephone facility is also provided by the company for workers, so those expenses should also be added. And loose tools to return AFI. So after using scrap or loose tools are there in the company, so their return of value should also be added under overhead. And water supply for factory, so that expenses should also be added. And general manager remuneration, factory general manager remuneration is added under overheads. And indirect expenses, these are the indirect expenses and factory cost incurred. So these are all come under overheads. The total of overheads and take it in an inner column. And next opening stock of work in progress, so this is to be added to the prime cost. So if there is any opening stock or work in progress, so then we have to less the closing stock of work in progress at the end of the year, and less sale of waste scrap. Is there any scrap? If it is sold, so the scrap value is less deducted from the opening stock of work in progress. So by from prime cost, if after deducting all these after adding all this, we'll get the work cost, total work cost. And next we have to add the office and administration overhead. So here office staff salary and directors fees, office rates and rents, and office stationery and printing expenses, sundry office expenses, so those are daily expenses, and depreciation on office furniture. So the depreciation on office furniture should also be calculated, and that is added to the office overheads. And our office lighting expenses, establishment charges, and director traveling expenses. So if the director is traveling from one place to another place, so those expenses are paid by the company, so those are added under office and administrative expenses. And consultants fees, if the company is consulting for any advice with another consultancies, so those fees should also be added in the administration. And contribution to provident fund, so if the provident fund is provided to office staff, those provident funds should also be added under office overheads. And postage expense, and company has postage expenses for a different post, so those expenses should also be added in under administrative overheads. And legal charges, so if a company hiring a lawyer, and if the company making any other contracts or agreements with others, so those expenses are also added under administrative expenses. And audit fees, so if it is a large and medium company, the company should definitely conduct audit in their company, so that audit fees and especially cost audit is done in the company, so that cost audit fees is added under administrative expenses in cost sheet. And bank charges, so bank is availing facilities from company is availing facilities from a bank, so if the bank is charging for those facilities, so those are added under overheads of administrative in cost sheet. Bank commission, if company discounting any bills, if the company the bank is taking commission in that, so that commission is also added under administrative expenses. And depreciation repairs of office equipment, so office equipment is depreciated according to the type of the fund equipments. And if there is any repairs has been made to those equipments, those charges are also added under administrative expenses. And bonus to staff, so is there any bonus given to the staff, so those bonus is also added under administrative expenses. And lighting and heating of administration building, if the company is in the cold area, so if they are using heating system for heating up the office or air conditioning in the hot areas, those expenses are added under administrative expenses. And office insurance, if they made any insurance of office, those insurance is also added under administrative expenses. And general manager remuneration, so office general manager remuneration is also added. And telephone and telegram, which is used in the office in different departments, so those expenses are also added. And investigation and experimental charges, if the company is conducting any marketing investigation or any other experiments in the factory or in the office, those expenses are also charges are also added. And wages of clerks, so wages of clerks and miscellaneous fixed charges are also added. And secretaries and accountants salaries, so these are separately added because there will be cost accountant separately, so his salary is added under administrative expenses, and with this we'll get the total cost of production after adding overheads to prime cost and office and administration expenses to prime cost. We'll get the cost of production. It will include all the costs of production, direct and indirect costs. And next, so to that cost of production we have to add the opening stock of finished goods, and if we have to less the cost of closing stock of finished goods from cost of production, then we'll get the cost of goods sold. And to that cost of goods sold we have to add the selling and distribution overheads. So with these are related after production. And advertising expenses, if the company is making any advertisements to promote the product, so those expenses are added under selling expenses. And showroom expenses, if the company has their separate showrooms for their products, so those showroom expenses are also added. And salesman salaries and expenses, if the company is selling persons to the consumers, so those persons salaries and expenses are also added under the selling expenses. And packing expenses and carriage outwards, so these are this transportation which comes under selling process from warehouses. These products should carried out to outlets, so those expenses are comes under selling expenses. We have to add those expenses to selling and distribution overhead and commission of sales agent. So if the sales agent making more increase in the sales, commission is paid to the sales agent, so that commission is also added under selling and distribution overheads. Under selling and distribution expenses, cost of catalogs, if the company is preparing catalog for their products for description, brief description, so those expenses are selling expenses, so those are added. And expenses of delivery van, so if the company on their own, if they are delivering the products to the outlets or to the consumers or to the departmental stores, so those expenses are selling expenses, distribution expenses, so those are added under overheads of selling and distribution. And collection of charges, is there different charges, are there service charges and other charges are there, those are added. Traveling expenses of salesman, so salesman has to go to the consumer directly, so for that he has to travel, so though if the company is providing traveling expenses to the salesman, so those are added to the selling expenses. And the cost of tenders, so having any tenders which they are tender to sell their products in a particular place, those tender expenses costs are added to the selling and distribution expenses. And warehouse expenses, so if they are rented or if they are maintaining their own house, there will be some expenses of lighting and supervisor and the insurance and other expenses. Sales manager salaries, after that sales persons, if they're having separate sales sales manager, so his salary is added under selling expenses. And insurance of showroom, so company have their own outlets, so they will be insurancing those showrooms, so to avoid the losses. And sales directors fees, sales office expenses are all added. Rent of sales office and repair depreciation of delivery van, so expenses of sales branch establishment, so here they have to establish some equipment to arrange the products. So those establishment charges are added under selling, distribution and selling expenses. And branch office expenses includes power, electricity, water, the home guard, security guard. So those are expenses of a branch. Those are added under selling and distribution expenses. Depreciation of sales office appliances. So if they are using air condition or anything else, so their depreciation. And bad debts. So if the company is providing credit sales, so there will be bad debts. So the bad debts are added under selling and distribution expenses. Cost of participation in industrial phase. So those are those expenses. And cost of free gifts. To increase the sales, the company is providing any gifts. So those costs are added under selling expenses. And cost of free after sales services. If the company providing sales services, after sales services, those expenses on loading and unloading. So there will be workers for loading and unloading the products. So their expenses and salary of delivery man and custom duties are added under office and distribution expenses. The prime cost, works cost, and cost of goods sold, and after adding office and distribution expenses, we'll get the total cost. And from that we have to minus the sales. Total cost will get the profit or loss. So after that we'll be having the sales. This is the cost sheet proforma, which is used to prepare to find out the total cost and as well as cost per unit.